You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
A source of truth for the medtech industry.
Coexists with the prophets.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the medtech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar M. Khatib.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. I'm in LA with a good friend of mine. You guys know him because he came on the show about a year ago, and that's Sam Mahmood. Sam is a good friend. He's somebody that started off in the industry on the medical device sales side, started his own business, and in my opinion is definitely a serial entrepreneur. We're going to cover a lot of interesting stories here. Not only his transition from medical sales to starting his own distributorship and manufacturing his own devices, but also what he's onto now. He's raised a fund and he's going and acquiring businesses. So a lot of really cool things to cover. Sam, thanks for joining me, man.
Thanks for having me on, Omar. Your podcast has taken off, and I'm glad to be here.
Absolutely. It's, like the people loved you when you came on about a year ago, and so it took some time, but I'm glad we were able to make this work out and do it in person. So,
yeah, let's dive into it.
Yeah. So, maybe a good place to start, for some of the audience that's just learning about you now, take us back to when you were about 23, 24 years old. What were you doing, and how did you end up into the medical device industry?
Great question. So 23 years old, 24 years old, I was pursuing professional soccer, actually. Post-college, I wanted to go play a little bit in Europe and then also in the second division here in the U.S. I don't think I was good enough to continue to go play where the Ronaldos of the world were going to go. So I had a self-reflective moment there where I realized that I have to either go get a job or go pursue soccer and maybe make $500-600 a month and have your rent paid for. And I knew having immigrant parents, that was not going to be the case, right? Especially only having about $700 in your bank account, that was not ideal at the time. So I took my first job at Edwards Life Science. I was a supply chain analyst where I was managing where all the heart valves went all over the country. Mm-hmm. The inflection point at Edwards Life Science happened when I was indicative of where all these heart valves were going worldwide. And I'd have Latin American managers, Asian managers, European managers all demand where the valves were going. And I saw these sales reps just going out there and saying, hey, I need my valves. And I realized from that get-go that I was not going to be praised for the spreadsheets I was working on. And I was just living and dying by these spreadsheets, and it didn't feel fulfilling whatsoever. But these sales reps were the ones out there making the big bucks. So I was very curious about what the whole medical device sales realm really looked like. So a year later, I left that supply chain analyst job, and I worked for a small fifth-tier craniomaxillofacial company. And I'll never forget the day I interviewed with this company. There was a guy who was a jock, former ASU guy. His former roommate was Pat Tillman. And he sat me down, and I was his fifth interview of the day. And I had zero experience to want to go sell. Mm-hmm. But I was a former athlete, and I could sit down and say, look, man, I know I can fucking do this. Mm-hmm. And he just looked me in the eye and just saw the hunger in me. A 25-year-old raw individual who wanted to go take a car and drive 40,000 miles a year in LA and go call on surgeons and go sell commodity plates and screws. And, I got the job. So at 25, I was running around LA. I was selling plates and screws for broken jaws, craniotomies, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And it taught me the best lesson ever, that I basically sold a pen to surgeons. I sold a very subpar product. And from that, I knew if I can go sell this, I can pretty much go sell anything else therefore after. And, shortly thereafter, it was 8 months in, and this 25-year-old kid talking to neurosurgeons every single day and plastic surgeons. And there's a hard learning curve of how to go speak in a very echelon way to these individuals. But I was so raw, and I didn't have any fear talking to them after doing this just after a few months. Shortly thereafter, an opportunity came to myself where I learned I can go build a distributorship from that. A distributorship, if your audience doesn't know what that is basically you start 1099ing yourself to multiple different medical device companies, and you're usually working for more lower middle market companies. It's a rare occasion where you can go distribute for Medtronic or these big companies, as they usually want you to work directly, right? I then shifted away from working for one company, became an agent, and at the age of 25, I was selling for multiple different medical device companies and formed Surgical Republic, my company, therefore after.
Why'd you do that?
There was an inflection point, I think, in the company where I felt constrained. Being tied to being on these corporate calls, I didn't feel in tune to want to go do that. And there was a calling saying, go take this risk. And the best part about being 25 and not knowing much is that your amygdala, I believe it is, your basically the fear in your brain, doesn't trigger unless you start knowing what the outcome could be, right? You're just fearless. And I said, what's the worst that could happen at the time? So I went and did this, and I learned a ton throughout the process. You lose all your insurance benefits, you lose all your your reimbursements and so forth from the companies. But I really felt like I became a man therefore after. And that also really separated me from a lot of my old friends. I realized I was running a real business. I was putting implants in people's bodies, selling very complex egalitarian items to surgeons who were not just like twice as smart as me, like 10 times smarter than me. As you know, like these surgeons have gone to so much school and have learned so much throughout the process that I'm supposed to sell something to them that is in their domain expertise. And this is quite intimidating, right? But at the same token, what I learned is that I can go and sell product to physicians under pressure and do this at a way that can create a level of scale for me at this point. And that was the biggest difference from working for one company versus selling for multiple companies. And I can start duplicating myself of multiple different products and hiring people underneath me to go do that. Prior to that, I didn't have that opportunity. So learning that at an early age, I said, wow, like how do you keep like unlocking the spiral effect? I almost call it like peeling back the onion, right? If the core of the onion is becoming the top of the food chain, right? And you're just peeling things back, and on the outside of the onion, you're basically pulling layers back and seeing how deep can you really go into your funnel. So after the distributorship happened, I was like, okay, well, where's the enterprise value in this distributorship? If I'm just brokering products today, I can't really sell this company if I want to. So I had the audacity at the age of 27 to go and say, how do I start making these medical devices? And, all it took for me, again, of having a lack of fear, I would say, was saying, a lot of these medical devices are made in Tuttlingen, Germany. I can go and figure out how to fly over there, talk to a bunch of these manufacturers, and see if there's an opportunity for me to go manufacture my own product.
How did you come about doing that, by the way? So you just literally looked up some manufacturers and say, I'm going to book my flight to Germany? Or how'd that come about?
It's a great question. I think I was burnt out on a random Friday. I think I had covered so many surgeries that week. I only had like one rep helping me at the time. And we were doing a ton of spine cases, a ton of orthopedic cases. And I was like, wow, this is just a lot. And
how far into your distributorship were you, like a year or two in?
A little under 2 years.
Okay.
So about a year and 10 months.
But for the audience, I mean, that's you cover a lot. Like I remember when I was a rep for maybe barely 2 years, and after the first year in, I'd covered I think well over 100 cases, maybe even more, and it wears on you for sure.
It does. I think one thing to note about me is I move at a velocity that I like to amplify to its highest extreme, because I'm willing to go see how fast you can move to get to the highest endpoint. I'm very curious about that, right? So if I see a sector where there's an opportunity to go and get to the highest level as fast as possible, I want to go skip those levels to go get there as fast as possible. And I knew like, hey, if I can start manufacturing these products, I can own the enterprise, I can own the supply chain, right?
You were looking for more leverage essentially because you were constrained to like the region based on these.
Correct. You dominate your local region, and then you start to spiral therefore after and start going into multiple states, and then you go nationwide.
During this time, did you so what's interesting about this is that it's very non-obvious, right? Because I know a lot of distributors, I think you might be the second one that I know in my career who decided to go and start manufacturing their own devices. You saw this a lot in the 80s and 90s, but post that, a lot of distributors just signed up a bunch of companies, owned a region, and their thing was just like, how can I add more SKUs, right? Yep. So how did you come about thinking about this? Because obviously you weren't learning from other distributors because you would have just done what their model was.
So it always comes from a place where an event happens. As I was scaling rapidly and I'm a young guy in this space, one of these companies ended up screwing me really bad. And, at the age of 26, I had my first litigation battle, right? And I learned a lot throughout that process. And then the big thing that I took away from the litigation was I didn't own anything per se. I was just a broker in between. And that's what I wanted to go solve. And therefore, after, that sat with me for a long time. And I said, I need to figure out how I am the beginning to the end user and I control that entire supply chain.
So this has to do, again, going back to leverage, was that you realized that you actually had no leverage in the end. So when you said they screwed you, was it mainly in the litigation, or like how did litigation come about, if you can talk about it?
Yeah, I can talk somewhat about it, right? So, you go build a territory for a company, and a lot of people know this, and as a 1099 rep, I had scaled it to probably like $180,000 a month in revenue. And at that point, they said, you know what, Sam, we want to go take this and become a direct model. And, these contracts are at will. They're 30-day notices. Me at the age of 27, I'm like, why would you ever go do this? I'm doing so well for the company. But new management comes in. They come from a huge, big conglomerate name that I won't mention. And they want to bring their own crew in, right? And they see, several $100,000 or $180,000 of sales per month. And they're like, we can go give that to our boys from this big conglomerate company. And that's what they ended up doing. And then I was left with nothing. And I kind of had to go rebuild that distributorship all over again and find more lines, as that was the lion's share of my revenue. So then after that, I said, okay, I built some other lines, found some other companies to go sell from. But then therefore after I said, there needs to be more than this. I need to go make sure that I can go sell my own products that have my name on that. And I swear to God, I remember this on a Thursday. It was like December, that year when I was about 27 years old. And then I started looking at just manufacturing companies in Tuttlingen in Germany. And, I made a whole Excel spreadsheet. I think it was like 11 p.m. on a Friday night, took a double espresso and started figuring this whole game out. And I was like, okay, I started making phone calls, asking about, who makes this and who makes that, who makes the kerosens, who makes, these cardiac instruments. And then I started puzzling all this stuff together. I'm like, okay, what do I want to go create here that's going to give me a level of a niche that I can go dominate in the sector? And I don't need to be a huge fish to start, but I just need to have an entry point. So there was this one account in Kaiser that approached me when I was down there in SPD. I'll never forget this. I was refilling some trays. And then I saw them just have a ton of kerosens that they were just tossing. They're like, yeah, we burn through these every 2-3 months. They just get dull really fast. I'm like, aren't those $1,000 a pop, $800 a pop? They're like, yeah, but we have 14 spine surgeons and we do, sometimes 6 to 8 spine cases a day. I was like, interesting. And you have one vendor to go, you just supply this whole thing? Like, yeah, we use this one vendor over and over again. And I was like, are you happy with it? He's like, well, we turn and burn these so much. It'd be better if we had something that's more sustainable. And I was like, can you give me the opportunity if I can go figure it out? I will go find you a better Ronjour. And I had no fucking idea what I was even talking about at the time. But that was my initiation point to go fly to Germany and figure that one problem out. So it always starts with solve one thing first and remove everything else and focus on that one thing. So I made sure I went to go find the best kerosin manufacturer. I ended up fucking that order up because I spent so much money on that initial order to make sure I had enough inventory. But I got so many different SKUs and I spent probably 6 figures on this initial order just to make sure I was well equipped to go fulfill these orders that they wanted to go do if I got the opportunity to. And this is prior to them giving me a PO at all, but there was an MOQ, a minimum order quantity I had to go do. And I wanted to show to the manufacturer that, hey, I can go play ball, right? These companies were making it for some of the big dogs in the place, like Medtronic and J&J and so forth, right? And what you need to know, and this is some secret IP to the audience, is a lot of this Tuttlingen mafia makes a lot of the same product for multiple companies. And that's how the medical device game works over there in Germany. So to expose some of the stuff out there, sorry for everyone if I poo-pooed your party. And I found the best company and I said, look, I want to commit to you guys for the long haul. And then I got the inventory, went back, got this FDA approved. It took me a 10-month process to go do so. And throughout the time I initially met with the SPD guy at Kaiser to 10 months later, I only saw him 2 or 3 more times. Hey man, I'm working on it. And one day I just show up with a bag full of kerosens. And he's like, how the fuck did you do this? And I was like, man, I just spent the last several months trying to figure this entire thing out because I knew that if I solve this problem, I can probably solve it for many other hospitals nationwide. And to me, that seemed like a lot more leverage than just working in my local geographic territory. So, it's a little bit of a Cinderella story. So long story short, they end up doing a trial for these kerosens. And this is an account that probably orders I don't know, 300 keratins a year, right? So if you do the math on that, that was a pretty fancy order to get going, where each keratin costs like $1,000-$1,200 a piece. And that was my first start to really start selling something that had my stamp, Surgical Republic, and selling that into hospitals. And then therefore afterward, I'm like, okay, I got in with something. Now you can feed the honey hole with other products therefore after. I started getting to like more of the neuro space, a little bit in the cardiac space, but then I started also focusing on another niche. I had a lot of surgeons catching wind of what I was doing. They're like, how are you making these instruments for us? I'm like, hey, I think I can go make you some custom instruments as well. And that was my way to also build relationships with surgeons. And I was able to do that a lot faster than most generic reps. When I mean generic, maybe someone who works as a W-2 for a big, large corporation. And, the key thing that I was trying to always seek in this medical device game was, how can I go connect with these surgeons in ways outside of just product? One thing I think everyone should notice as well is the company you work for, you could leave and switch companies 4 or 5 times, but they will invest in you. And I always knew that from the get-go at the age of 25 when I got in this space. And I knew that if I was able to connect with these physicians and add a ton of value that no one else could, I will always have and hone that relationship wherever I want to go sell something. They most likely will follow as long as I'm ethical throughout that process and I've served them the right way. So my leverage point was be able to create some, specific instruments for these surgeons. I did that several times, and the gratification of making a custom instrument to a surgeon is like no other. I mean, you put their initials on that instrument, they see that it's custom to them. Right away, you've like won their heart. It's like you're almost married to the guy at that point because you've designed something specifically to them. And we all know this, right? You make something to a egotistical surgeon and design it directly to them.
Which doesn't happen these days anymore.
No.
Back in the day, it used to happen quite often, but like even back when you did this, or even the last like 15 years, it's just very rare.
It's very rare, and I had to go do something rare, because in this space of medical device, one thing you have to know, either you have to play in the most expensive route and be like Scanlon, who's like sells these instruments today that are so expensive, and I think it's an amazing brand. They're the Gucci, Louis Vuitton of instruments, right? Or you got to go to someone like a V Mueller or whatever, who's willing to just go play on price and they want volume, right? And to me, I was like, okay, I can't go play on volume game because I don't have the capital to go support that. I don't want to go too expensive because they'll just tell me to go piss off, right? Mm-hmm. So I had to go find just a couple of unique things where I'm somewhat premium, but the premium validates the product. And I made custom things and different things that no one else had. Then I focused on that, and then therefore after you start getting other commodities that people are looking for, because that's where the volume is, right? And that's how you initially want to create almost any business today. You don't want to start in commodity. You want to start in specialty and go 2 inches wide, 10 feet deep, and then go capture the other honey hole of other commodity items that will generate you more revenue. That was like my journey. And today, what's unique about Surgical Republic, it operates on a 2-sided model that I'm more or less removed from today. But it's a direct-to-consumer model that sells instruments nationwide across the country. I believe today we're in 38 states, and it's a direct-to-consumer Shopify website that people can buy online. We have national contracts as well. And then we have a lot of distributors who sell our products nationwide. And secondly, we still run the distributorship, where we sell a ton of spine hardware and cranial and cardiac implants as well, more or less in the Southern California market. I removed myself more or less from the company. I hired a CEO in place who operates the business. We have several sales reps and distributors who sell the product. And now I serve as the president of the company rather than the CEO.
In hearing the story, something that stands out to me in terms of a point of leverage is that you started essentially with nothing. You didn't have any specific skills around product, etc. But what you did have, which I think every sales rep has, and they don't realize this, is the ability to deliver like outstanding customer service and a level of discipline that you don't transact the relationship right away. And it sounds like that's where you started. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, along with grit, right? Let me tell you.
This game ain't easy, right?
This game ain't easy, especially in certain markets where you're driving in traffic and you're dealing with a very competitive landscape where sometimes these nurses and OR directors aren't very friendly to you, right? I think the one thing I held throughout the process of being in this medical device space was I was very confident of who I was, and I think people appreciate that, where I can be a little bit unapologetic, but I always stood my ground. Whether it was to a physician, to someone in hospital administration, I never let anyone bully me, even at a young age. And it's very easy to get bullied in this space.
Can you give me an example of something like that?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all been there where we've absolutely fucked up a case, right? And we understand that. But at the same token, if a surgeon's going to rip you in the middle of surgery, that's not going to solve the problem, right? And I've had that, right? And I've had nurses chew me out as well. But I know if we stepped out of the OR or stepped out of the hospital, no one would ever talk to me like that, right? But I guess when they have the white coat on or there's a red hat on, they separate, the chain of command of one versus the other, and they feel they have the right to go speak to you like that. Where I was able to stand my ground and said, look, you can yell at me all you want right now, but that's not going to solve the problem. So instead of doing that, why don't we just focus on the problem, and I can just go and solve for that today. And responding in a way where you're calm, and collective throughout that process, and knowing that this guy didn't just walk away or squirm away from the situation. He stood his ground and acknowledged that he made the mistake. And then his sole fiduciary obligation, and he's going to go solve that. So he's going to find a solution right then and there. And I was able to go do that, right? From a surgeon to rep perspective, to a nurse to rep perspective, just know you're going to be solution oriented, because humans will make mistakes, right? It's quite normal. And you have to know, if you're going to walk in this space, the biggest thing that of making a mistake in this arena versus, car sales is there's a patient on the table, right? And I totally acknowledge the fact that this is a lot higher stakes for that reason. But it's all about how you handle the situation. How you react in this type of environment will show who you are as an individual for the long run, right? And I think all people really want to see is a level of authenticity, that you own up to your mistakes when you are wrong, and they don't want to hear excuses.
They want to see action,
but also own up to when you're wrong. And don't be the guy, ego is the enemy, right? So if you make a mistake, own it, and it's okay. I'm big on humility today. I own all my issues to people around me, my close group of circle. I'm not fearful to say the things that I'm at fault at. And I think people trust you a lot more when you're like that, because they know you're not going to put a facade on.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. In reflecting on that, and I completely, I'm with you on the fact that I think what makes a great rep is not only discipline, but extreme ownership and action. Excuses, I think there's too many reps out there that make excuses and they try and butter people up and everything, but people want to see action, kind of like what you did with that, OR director, when you said you're going to find better rongeurs, and you did eventually do that. If you go back in your time between being a rep and then the first years of being a distributor, right, you went through some serious inflection points in growth. So, and whether it's surgeons or OR directors, business partners, etc., if you thought back to the most painful thing someone ever told you that actually forced you to change for the better, what comes to mind?
Ooh, there's a few. I think the most important thing, Omar, is sometimes you're going to have goals that are much larger than other people's expectations of you. And that will cause a level of friction. And I was that person. And at the age of 27 and 28, I always wanted to outbeat all my opponents. I wanted to do bigger things. And sometimes people don't like when you're moving too fast. Maybe there's a level of envious. Maybe there's a level of, hey, he's not one of us anymore. And I had a physician who watched me throughout this process and said, he told me these words, I'll never forget this. He goes, Sam, one day you're going to realize that you're a lot better than just waiting around for doctors and surgeries to happen. And I was like, what do you mean by that? He's like, you'll realize this in a few years, that you will separate yourself from this industry because you are trying to go outpace at a rate that many people cannot understand in this space. And I lost a little bit of connection to the healthcare and medical device space because it didn't fulfill me at the age of 29 anymore. I think a lot of people get in this space purely for the monetary reasons when I'm talking about industry.
Yeah.
Because, the stigma around medical device is that you walk into the space and there's good money to be had. And that is true. Don't get me wrong. But you have to also love what you're doing, right, Omar? And you probably love creating podcasts, whether monetarily it thrives you or not. I think people can tell that you enjoy producing these episodes.
Absolutely. You don't put out 2-3 episodes a week just for the heck of it, right?
Exactly. And I lost the desire of seeing screws going into patients or selling just random instruments and even specific instruments to hospitals and healthcare. I like the business and what I built, but at the same token, something was off. And, I think surgeons started to realize that. I would go to dinner with them, talk about life, talk about purpose and business, and they started to see that I was looking for something more. And that's
you wouldn't be talking about like their next case and everything, which a lot of times, yeah. And it's interesting because I noticed this earlier in my career, which is when you could take a surgeon to dinner, and they light up when you talk about things other than the case, like history, business, psychology, all these things. And a lot of the best relationships I started when I was a rep and then a marketing manager was because of that. That was kind of like my first, sort of aha moment where I'm like, I don't think I should be doing this anymore. For you, do you feel like were you just getting bored, or did you just feel like your soul was dying and you were like, there's more to life and business than this?
Yeah, my soul was dying. It died.
And we talked about this like a couple of years ago when we first met.
Yeah, my soul died in that space where I'd go out and talk about what I was doing. People can just tell like I'm not that interested in what I was saying about the medical device space. And this is me opening up right now. Not many people know this because I just think the space got a really bad rep over time where all people were trying to do was reduce these implant prices and everyone was trying to block you out of these hospitals. And it didn't feel fulfilling anymore to go hunt for new business or engage with new hospitals. It was a very negative mantra around that. And to me, it's just like, it didn't serve me to want to wake up every day and go to war and like be fulfilled.
Do you feel like also the game that you were playing was in some ways, I mean, to go back to like leverage, not only rigged, but like rules that you had zero control over and you had no idea when they were going to change?
Big time.
You know? And so you can put in all this effort like you did originally with that one company as a distributor, build a market, grow a business, do all the right things, and then just have it all just taken away from you, like just like that. And there's nothing you can do about that. That's
exactly what it is. I mean, you hit it on the nail. And when I started going to dinners with other surgeons, we started talking about business, started talking about real estate. I had acquired a business at 29. I did an SBA loan doing so. It was another more or less surgical instrument business to add on to my company. And they started asking me all these curious questions, like, why are you buying all these real estate? Why are you buying these small businesses right now? And I said, look, I'm just an entrepreneur at heart, right? I'm creative. I'm willing to go take risks. I'm very curious. And I think I was just doing things that not many people my age were doing. And it was drawing a lot of curiosity from physicians. And they're the ones that said, like, why don't you just try to go and do bigger things? And that's what kind of led me now to, I would say, transition out of the whole medical device healthcare space and go more into what I'm doing now of like buying these small businesses, creating a fund and doing so.
There's you're very you put out some great content. I love the content you put out, not only on LinkedIn and Twitter, but also you have a great newsletter. Very much about like acquiring business. And for the audience that's listening, we'll leave it in the show notes. I do recommend you go subscribe to it. But I do want to bring up, like, there's a tweet that you tweeted like a long time ago, actually. And I'm wondering if you can expand on this, which is,
sure.
You tweeted that the most admirable individual is someone who climbs a mountain, realizes it's not the correct one, and then decides to walk down and climb the right mountain. So to put it into context, you spent almost a decade, but like a lot of time, a lot of years, a lot of hours, blood, sweat, and tears to make all these mistakes, go to Germany, build this business and everything. You got it to this point, and now you're deciding at a pretty young age to transition out of it and start fresh, which is very difficult and very scary, and there's a lot of unknowns. Tell it, like, kind of expand a little bit on that. And like, if you can remember the day that you tweeted that, what made you tweet that?
Man, I have like a big sigh from you just reading that, right? So I wrote a journey of entrepreneurship for 7 years, building that company by myself. It's like I feel like I climbed Mount Everest and then took a cane with me along the way and was just picking at it nonstop to get up to the top. I got up to the top, and I'm not going to say I built something as big as these big companies, but I felt like I built something substantial at that point, right? Where I built this company. I'm in my late 20s. It's doing, fairly well at the time, highly profitable. And
in a very good market, by the way, Southern California.
Southern California, it's AI proof. It's very resistant to a lot of economic downturn. And I was like, wow, I am not that happy with this business. So you sit at the top of the mountain, you can sit down there, you can just look from afar and say, well, I can sit here, I can keep maybe climbing a new mountain, or I can walk down this mountain and find another mountain to go climb. And that's probably one of the hardest things as an entrepreneur to go do, because you're making a seismic shift in your life that has an unknown outcome. And entrepreneurship is literally just putting units of input of hoping that the outcome will come to fruition one day that will pay you a handsome dividend. That is a variable that you can't really control, right? So I walked down that mountain, and I said, hey, look, I think I know this game of entrepreneurship. I understand business decently well at the time. And I don't think I want to go pursue much more in this healthcare space of building my instrument company in a distributorship. I want to go learn more about these business acquisitions and investing. Throughout the time of building my company, I had bought a fair amount of real estate. That didn't fulfill me as well. But I had friends with these smaller businesses that I had invested in. Checks of $25,000 to $50,000. I was writing checks into my friends' companies, and they were ranging between at the time they were anywhere from $500,000 to $3 million in revenue. And, some were these various service businesses. And I was like, okay, this is interesting. If I stroke you a check and it's within my niche and I can go create a flywheel around this, meaning that I have an opportunity to write you a check and then maybe help expand and grow the business because I know people who can help this, or I have a unique competitive advantage to grow that business for you. As a limited partner, I think there was a lot more fulfillment of doing that. And then I said, okay, well, how do I go acquire a majority of these businesses now too? And then that's where the concept came and said, let me go find a niche where I can go and create a really good team around me. Remember, I had built everything by myself the entire time for the last 8 years. And I said, if I can go put really good people around me and pick one sector and do that very well, I can go and build something special. And I had the audacity of starting to learn private equity game, learning how to build funds and holding companies. And I created a fund and a holding company at the same time. So the holding company is SP Ventures, and we started investing in service business from that. And then my fund is the Pave, which is pretty much I serve as the CEO of this fund today. We're raising $30 million at this point right now, and raised a fair amount of money over the last several months to go buy paving companies specifically. And I get this question all the time, how the fuck do you go from medical device to paving companies, right?
Well, I'd imagine part of this is that as you're walking down this mountain, you're trying to walk up something new. But before we talk about the paving, so just to be clear, you are raising, or you have raised to date 30 mil?
No, we're raising.
But you I know that you've closed some deals, which, by the way, congratulations.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a second. I want to dig a little bit deeper, just because, we have a lot of audience from, shout out to Matt Device from the Red Hat Gang who are listening to this and are inspired by it. I want to understand something for a second, because you have a very non-obvious and niche experience as a 20-year-old. In your 20s, some people are just climbing the corporate ladder.
Yep.
Some people, they start a business and they just try and scale it. So a lot of inflection points and transitions that you're going through right now, at least from all the books I've read and interviews I've done, usually happen to people when they're in their 40s or 50s or
Yep.
60s, and you're in your early 30s. What I want to know is, why are you like this? You and I, we talk, we have a shared cultural background that we're both Iraqi. What was your childhood like? In terms of your parents' influence on you and how you think and do things? Because you've tweeted about it. Me as an Arab guy, I'll read the tweets and I'm like, oh man, I know how that feels. Tell us a little bit about your parents if you're okay with that.
Yeah. My dad's a ruthless entrepreneur. My dad doesn't compliment me much, but I appreciate that he doesn't do that.
You say your dad's a ruthless entrepreneur.
A ruthless entrepreneur. He runs a hard money lending business in the
That is a ruthless game.
advanced payday MCA business in the hood of San Diego, where he's lending out money and then getting interest on that, and people are paying him every 2 weeks from doing so.
And when he lends out money, they put up some collateral or something.
Yeah, it's the advanced payday game is regulated across the country, but it's basically I'm going to give you $250 and you owe me $300 in 2 weeks. If you compound that and calculate that, it's a 200% return cash on cash over 12 months. So my dad thinks it's the best business of all time, and he thinks any other business outside of that, any endeavor that I've ever done, is complete garbage, right?
Sounds like an Arab dad.
Very Arab, Middle Eastern dad, right? So he questions everything I do today. He still wonders what the hell I'm doing, but I think somewhere deep inside of him, he's quite supportive, but he just doesn't express that. And my mom is a heart of gold. She doesn't really know what I do, but she supports me in any way possible, and she's just there as a sounding board, I think, and that's what's awesome. She's a mortgage broker today. So both my parents came here from Iraq in the 1970s. They left the war of Saddam Hussein, and my dad came here with probably $800 in his bank account, ended up going to University of Toledo, Ohio, got an engineering degree, still has very broken English, but has been here for 45 years now and runs a hard money lending business. And they've been down in San Diego for the last, I think, 38 years.
I want to tell you that, like, I think you should be, I know you are, but you're very proud of what you did. And more importantly, I think it's because I go through the same thing with my parents, which is sometimes when their friends ask, like, oh, what does Omar do? Because I'm not in medical school anymore, so they can't just give an answer like, oh, he's a doctor. They struggle to this day, even though I've explained many times what I do. And I think that's a good thing, because for somebody like yourself, and we'll focus this on you, you're following your own path. Yeah. Like, very uniquely, you're following your own path. You're not following a playbook or a path that somebody else gave you. And it's going to be much, much harder, and it's going to be a lot more strenuous and painful, but you will self-actualize and you will achieve a lot more through that. I want to ask you if you're okay sharing, because it's one of my favorite stories that I read of yours. Tell us about that day that your dad, there was a car that was put up for collateral. Can you share that story, please? and specifically paint that picture, like how old you were and everything.
Okay. So I am 16. I am ecstatic. I just got my driver's license. My dad, running a hard money lending business, also will pawn jewelry and cars, right? So for your audience that doesn't know what that means, basically, if you're out of cash and you have a car and it's worth $5,000, they'll say, hey, I'll give you $4,000 in cash and use that as collateral. And then, when you pay the cash back, you can have your car back. Well, if they don't pay the cash back, he keeps the car. So, he had an Alfa Romeo 1978, right? This thing was super beat up, probably worth at the time maybe $2,500, $3,000, right? Mm-hmm. I'm 16. The only income I've ever had was I was refereeing soccer and doing personal one-on-one training soccer of young kids, and I would make like $50 or $60 an hour. And I had fortunate enough to save up maybe $1,800 at the time. That was my life savings at 16. So as I wanted to get a car, my sisters were able to get nice cars before me, and then I'm the young man, and he wants to kind of teach me a lesson to go, figure it out, right? So he's like, hey, I got this Alfa Romeo. It's affordable. I was like, well, they got nice cars. He's like, well, that's them. This is you. Different story. This is your option. And I'm like, okay, like, how do I get this car from you? Well, he's like, oh, we're going to teach you how to go basically finance a car. So I said, look, I got $1,800. He's like, okay, how about this? Like, the car is worth $5,200, and why don't you give me your $1,800 and just make payments of $250 a month, right? $250 a month is a lot for me to do a lot of trainings by the time I was still in school too, right? So in the summers I worked my ass off to make some money, and I'm paying off this car, and then after 6 months of owning this car, by the way, it's stick shift, and I learned how to go drive this thing. It freaking sucked. And I was like, I want to go upgrade this thing, right? I want a bigger car that's not stick shift, and it doesn't make some shitty noise when I go down the street. I tried to go to a car dealership and get it appraised by Kelley Blue Book, and they're like, this thing's worth like $3,400. And I'm like, if I do my math right, and I think at the time I was in like algebra, and I'm like, how did I lose $2,000 in value in just a short period of time? And I went to another car dealership. They said the same thing, $3,600. Went to a third one, same thing. So I go back to Mr. Salam, and I'm like, hey,
Baba,
man.
what what's going on?
Like, the math isn't mathing right here. And he's like, oh, so it took you 6 months to realize you did a bad deal. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you never checked the value of the car, and that's on you. I'm like, I'm 16. He's like, go figure it out. This is your problem now. So my dad taught me a lesson at the age of 16 that always due diligence everything, right? Always check the numbers. And, if I know a funny story before that too, and, this is his way of reprimanding me. When I was 12 and 13 years old, I started looking at profit and loss statements because my dad would take me to his work in order for me to go to soccer practice and him to drop me off at 5 p.m. down in the hood of San Diego where I played with all the Hispanic guys. I had to go down there, and he's like, you got to work a little bit. Start counting cash, looking at balance sheets, looking at profit and loss. He's like, look, top number, that means revenue. Bottom number, that means what we made that day. Start knowing the arbitrage between the two. So at the time I was 16, I was just so giddy. I was a soccer player. I wanted to go drive around. I wanted to go take girls out on dates, and I wanted a better car. And all he wanted to go do was teach me a lesson. And that's my dad, right? And that's why I love him so much today, because yes, he doesn't compliment me and doesn't say good job that I've done X, Y, and Z thus far. But what deep inside, I think that those type of lessons is what makes a man. It's not by giving, kids today where they're granted so many things that honestly corrupt them more or less. And even though I grew up in a privileged family, my parents did well. I really learned the hard work of making a buck, and today that's instilled me, and that's who I am today.
No, I love that. And I wanted you to share that story because we have people who are parents who are listening. I have a son, and I think it's really important because especially when you're raising a boy to be a man, you have a choice, I think, as a father, which is either you are ruthless with your son, with your children, and you break them and you teach them these lessons, or the world will. And the world is not going to be as forgiving, and they'll take more advantage. So I think you're very lucky to have a father like that. But those are brutal lessons, though, I got to say, But it made you who you are, though.
It did. Yeah. I wouldn't change it for the world, Omar. I really wouldn't. I think people need to go eat shit to start realizing what sugar tastes like.
Ain't that the truth, man? Ain't that the truth? I'll tell you one thing I always think about is like, man, some of these kids who are like 19, 18, 20 years old who just randomly puts, $100 into some random NFT that's worth like millions of dollars, like zero effort, zero risk, zero pain,
Yeah, and this is, to dive into that a little bit, a lot of people have come up to me recently like, hey man, like this is the quote I get all the time is like, I want to make $100,000 a month, and this is what I want to go do, right? Mm-hmm. And they just focus on this term, $100,000 a month, and I'm like, well, tell me like how you're gonna go do that. And usually the business is quite fragmented, and they don't really have a good process on going to make $100,000 a month or even $20,000 a month, right? So I kind of created this formula that when someone wants to come ask me something of building a business today, it's two things, and it's a very simple formula, right? Is you want to solve the known variables, and then hopefully those known variables will solve the unknown variable. So the two things that you can control are the people and the opportunity. And the people will be like maybe the X variable. The opportunity will be the Y variable. And then Z is the outcome, right? But you can see many people are solving for the $100,000 a month, which is the outcome, without solving the known variables, right? And that's where the discrepancy is today in society of people who are, young NFT guys trying to make money. They're just gambling on something short term. But, the reality is the pyramids in Egypt weren't built overnight, right? That has a strong foundation that is built over centuries. Mm-hmm. And I think when people want to go build a business today, they should understand that you want to build a proper foundation. So even on the things that I'm building today, I focus, when I climbed down that hill and I told you that story, I said, I took a lot of time on understanding the people I wanted to go build something with and the opportunity that would tie to the highest skill set of those people. And then I'm not worried about the outcome because I know the outcome will come.
Do you feel like, and I completely agree with you, and we had this discussion a while back because I think early for me as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, there was this focus on revenue first. Your thing is that if you focus on the variables you control, the money isn't the product, it's the byproduct of a really, really good business.
Exactly.
Yeah. So something that you also wrote about, I want to bring it up because I like your philosophy around building teams and hiring great people, right?
Yep.
And I think that's like the first evolution of a great entrepreneur. And I think that's when you move from a a small business owner with a small s, entrepreneur with a little e, to like an actual entrepreneur, which is figuring out how do you hire the right people and plug them in. So you wrote this is earlier you said, my zone of genius is retaining excellent talent. I jokingly ask my employees how happy they are every week to check in with them. As I focus on building and acquiring businesses, the cost of change is the most expensive liability. I'm studying companies that have a high level of employee retention. Compare this to sports. Focus on building your best basketball team. The Fab Five from Michigan was memorable for starting the same team from their first year till the players went pro. The hack, find people you can see yourself working with for life. So would you agree with the saying, I think Naval said this, which is like, if you don't see yourself working with somebody for a lifetime or for 10 years, why work with them for a day? Would you agree with that?
I say that quote almost weekly.
So how do you find the best people and how do you retain them? I think finding them is a little bit easier, but once you find a rock star or superstar, how do you retain those people?
So the most important thing first is like the ethics and culture fit. I think people get it wrong. They look at talent first, but you know, if I brought you a 10 out of 10 talented individual to work at your company, but they didn't have cultural fit or ethics, you know, the opportunity cost to change that person is going to cost you a lot.
What do you mean by, be more specific, what do you mean by ethics?
You know, trust is everything in any business. If you're going to hire someone or bring on a partnership, I've just seen massacres, right? Because the trust and the foundation wasn't built there. Good example, you know, my partner now, my fund, when I asked him for his references, he said, look, here, I'm going to give you 5 references. This is 2 people who like me, 2 people who kind of think I'm okay, and 1 person who really does not like me because a deal went bad. Right then and there, that brought a lot of trust to me. Why? Because he's not giving me the best 5 people who might be his friends, who might speak highly of him, who will be a little bit more biased. He wanted to give me the honest answer of, you know, things that actually went wrong, right? And he wanted me to talk to people where things did go wrong and there's still the perspective they have of him today. And to me, I think people, if they put their best foot forward and just show a level of honesty at all times and you bring that honest energy, the skill set will grow over time, right? You can take a 7 and bring them to an 8.5, but you can't take a 10 talent who has a 6 ethics and try to turn ethics into an 8. It's hard because ethics and trust is instilled inside of them. It's hard to change that in someone, right? Usually those things are embedded from a young age. So those are the things I look at first. Another thing too, I stole this from Scott Galloway, is he had this quote where like management turns into culture when your employee base can start working without you, right? So what he has is like if 4 people come together, they can take his credit card and pretty much go to dinner, go to lunch, they can go travel together and go build a culture in the community. And that's where that shifts from management to culture. Because there's a philosophy that he also said is that people don't stay at companies for benefits or higher pay. They stay at companies because they have a friend they can go to work with and hang out with. And I want to instill that into my company today.
I'm happy you mentioned this. A few episodes back, so one of my good friends, I need to connect you guys, is Joseph Highland Othman. He's the VP of Commercial over at Echo. Really well-respected guy, great leader. And we were talking the other day because there was a post on LinkedIn that was criticizing the idea of like, don't be friends with the people that you work with. And and for him, he cringed at that because he's like, that's terrible. You should feel like the people that you work with are people that you can be friends with outside of work and share the same values and everything. You had this post, either a post or you and I were talking about it, where I think in Surgical Republic, you hired 2 people who are best friends and you feel like that's like a huge unlock. And I loved your philosophy around this. Can you talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very big at comparing sports to business. Like, this is my new sport. So I want to create brotherhood, sisterhood into my companies, right? I want to form a bond in these companies where they love interacting with each other, because that's gonna bring longevity into business, right? I can put 2 people who are quite talented in a room together. If they have zero connectivity to one another, how will they want to communicate with one another and be successful together? Because it's a team-oriented sport.
And I love that you pointed that out. And that was the thing that Joseph and we talked about, which is like, if you feel like you have this bond with somebody, you respect them, you feel like you would hang out with them outside of work, you want to help each other and you want to win as a team. It's not just like, oh, if I'm doing well in the company but this other person is not, then
Yeah.
like doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to comparing sports again, look at the best teams that have won big championships, right? You got Jordan, Scottie Pippen. You got Shaq and Kobe. You got Rob Gronkowski and Tom Brady, right? These are like brotherhoods at teams that won national championships. That's data you can go look at today. Take that same thing. If it's gonna work in sports, it will work in business as well. Because what you want to create is synergies between people, and then create that 1 + 1 = 3 effect or 4 effect, right? And that happens when you have people who want to go to work for you, and not just work for you and then look at the clock and wait till it's 5 p.m. They want to go put extra hours for you because they want to go to war for you and grow this business because they love the environment they're working in. Like, I've had some of my worst days and I did not feel fulfilled. And I had some of the highest revenue months in my entire life because I felt I was a lone soldier doing this by myself. And I had zero connectivity with any of my employees at that time. And that completely shifted when I started building a proper team. I put great people together. I took less of the profits, but I loved what I had built with Surgical Republic at the time because there were people who were doing a ton of the work together, and I saw the camaraderie happening. And yes, I took a pay cut at me as a president CEO of the company, but I was totally okay with that because I saw the machine working at that point. And that to me was like, wow, this is scalable at this point now. You feel that momentum with people working together. It's the most beautiful thing you could ever see.
Do you feel like I feel like that's a very strong point of leverage, which is the ego wants more things, more money, more etc., and more control. Your thing is give up more money, give up more control, but then you end up with more leverage because you actually have built a machine that does not need you operating it 24/7. Do you feel like this is the mistake that a lot of small business, I feel like when you're a venture-backed entrepreneur, you are forced to think like that. But when you're a small business owner and you've started a company on your own, you can do whatever you want. You don't have a board to report to.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's a mistake a lot of small business owners make, which is they get too focused on, I want to have all this control, I want it 100% done my way, I want all the money, and then they have all this churn and they wonder why they're miserable. They're like a slave to their company. They might as well just have a job.
Yeah, I mean, even if you never plan on selling your company, you always want to build a sellable asset. In order to do so, you have to build the machine.
Interesting. Why do you say, I like that positioning. Why do you say that?
Because you want to be able to remove yourself from the operations to go take a vacation and be present with your family or girlfriend at some point and not be tied to your phone. Like if you want proper quality of life, you want to make sure that the operations will run without you. And the only way to do that is knowing that the business is running because you built a proper machine that can run without you. You know, today in business acquisitions, what do we look for today? We want to make sure, hey, the owner, how tied are you to the business, right? And if we see he's very tied, that lessens the enterprise value of the business. But when we see that the owner is checked out, he works 3 days a week, he's got 7 sales reps operating the business today, and he's built a $20 million entity, I'm like, impressive. Like that obviously is going to promote a larger multiple, and he's created a lot more enterprise value in his company, right? So think in the end in mind when you start a business today that you want to build it to sell, no matter what. And the way to framework that whole thing is, do you have system operating processes in place that you don't have to go and tell people what to do, and they can go look at a system and make sure they're following that. So document your entire process. Make sure everybody knows the most fundamental things about your business, from its most smallest to large level extremities in the business, knowing every single part of the process, because that will allow everyone to understand the cadence of how the business runs. And that's what you want to build.
Got it. I love that. Transitioning to what you're doing today, right? You started the Pave, you're essentially acquiring these businesses that do construction on roads. What did you read? And how did you come to that? How did you develop this thesis? What book were you reading? What day was it? Take us back to that, because I think that sets up a really interesting transition into what the Pave is.
6 months ago, I was sitting on my porch reading Elon Musk's biography. There was an inflection point in the book where he was talking about the self-driving vehicles and the self-driving automation vehicles that was launching, I think, with the Tesla truck at the time. And there was a certain turn, I believe, in Austin, Texas, that was not performing. And Elon knew that he had tested the car thousands of times and knew it wasn't the car and it had to be something else. So he started pinpointing that at the line stripings on the roads and the roads themselves. Rest assured, he called the city and said, hey, the lines on the roads are too faded and the road quality condition is poor. Please go repave the roads and go re-line stripe the roads. Shortly thereafter, when he did that, he tested that turn again and the car performed. So that was a light bulb moment for me, saying, wow, roads are going to be exponentially a lot more valuable with robo-taxi and Waymo entering the market today as the normal way of transporting humans as taxis around the country, right? So then I started looking into this and I said, okay, is there a thesis around this? And I was like, wow, the Bipartisan Act is deploying $350 billion into fixing roads and bridges just on the public municipality side. So that was a light bulb moment number 2. And then thirdly, I'm like, okay, these construction workers, there was a stat that said 50% of construction workers are retiring by 2030, over 50% of them. And I'm 32 today. I don't know many 32-year-olds who are entering the paving sector or construction sector per se. The tech, media, SaaS, agency businesses, that's what they're all into today. So I'm like, these guys lack a succession plan. They've paved their way, quote unquote, of a great business. Some of these businesses have been around for 20, 30 plus years and have 10, 20, $30 million in revenue and $3, $4, $5 million of EBITDA. And I'm like, wow, these are good, sustainable businesses. So then from that, I said, hey guys, and the guys, I'll refer to them in a sec, I said, let's go build a company called the Pave. And we're going to buy paving companies exclusively in the Southwest, doing between $1 and $10 million of EBITDA that focus on paving specifically, who have a strong management team in place, who are mature, and we can go buy these businesses today. And us being called the Pave will show a secular focus where these sellers are going to want to sell to us because that's all we do. And again, when I climbed down that mountain and I knew I wanted to go do something different, I knew it goes back to that story I told at the very beginning of this podcast of just helping and build that grandeur first. And I focused solely on that one problem. Well, today that one problem solving is just buying paving companies from owners who have zero succession plan. And we play in a very unique market, right? We play in this lower middle market private equity where it's too small for middle market private equity. These businesses do between $8 and $22 million, $25 million of revenue. And it's too big for mom and pop who want to get into buying their first paving business, right? So it allows us to really dominate this sector today. And, that's our entire focus. Initially, we raised a $15 million fund, and now we're raising $30 million. And that's where we're at today.
That's awesome. And you did this, because we catch up almost every other week. And so you did this rather fast. Because I remember when I spoke to you 4 or 5 months ago and you told me about this. And this was I think when you read that book, it was on a Friday.
Yep.
Okay, so we got to come up with a term for this, because for Elon Musk, when he was doing the overhaul and the supply chain, everything, he goes into demon mode, which is not a good thing. Recently, Paul Graham talks about founder mode. You have your own mode where it's always on a Friday. I'll call you and you're vibing in your office. You got the music on, everything. I'm like, oh, what are you doing? And you're like, oh, I've been here for the last 8 hours working on this one thing. So you get it really into this focus mode when you get into this thesis. I love the thesis of this. So for one, it obviously works because you didn't raise, we won't mention it here, but you didn't raise money from just random people. You raised it from very reputable investors. You've raised 15 mil so far. Is the idea around this in terms of how private equity works is that you have these businesses that have a good business model, good revenue, good EBITDA, right? And to have one thesis you focus on to bring all these people together. So instead of having these businesses that are doing 3 to 4 million in EBITDA, maybe you have one business that has a conglomerate of 40 to 50 mil plus in EBITDA, correct?
Correct.
And then you're able to sell that off.
Correct.
Is part of this also that, going back, because I think it's a very interesting model, because you're right that everybody's focused on AI, tech, and everything. So there's these things that, paving roads is just not going to go away. I mean, Elon, just last night, they revealed their robo-taxi. Yeah, it was beautiful. Is the idea of this is that you find, let's look at your typical construction business owner, somebody who's usually in their 50s, 60s, 70s. They probably don't have kids to pass it on to, or if they do, the kids are just not interested in that. So they have a good business. Is this an exciting opportunity for that owner to sell part of the business to you guys? You rope it in, and they get kind of a second bite of the apple, because if you built a great business, don't just sell it all, right? Is that the thesis here?
So to put it in perspective, these guys have slaved away for 30 plus years building this business. And this is usually their first time ever selling a business, right? So it's quite new to them, yet exciting at the same time. So we come in and look at these businesses today, more or less, let's say they trade between 2 and 5x EBITDA, right? EBITDA is earnings before income tax, depreciation, amortization. And, a business doing today, let's say it's $3 million of EBITDA, that can trade for 3 or 4 times, right? But then when you start having 6 or 7 of these businesses combined together in one geographic sector, that's where you start getting a double-digit multiple, right? And it's called the roll-up strategy. And if I can start combining these companies together and talking to all these baby boomers and saying, hey, look, I'm going to buy your business. I'm also going to buy other businesses around you. Can you call your buddies to see if anyone else is going to sell? I'm basically creating them to become a millionaire at that point, right? They've already made millions of dollars, but they're getting a huge liquidation event the day they sell their company. We usually have them stay on for a bit as well, but they sell us usually between 90 to 100% of the company, and we keep them on for at least a year. And this is like the funnest thing I've ever done in my entire life. Like talking about what lights me up. There's nothing else that has lit me up like this in my entire life than the day I started my first company. And I remember those early years. But I definitely could see myself running this business acquisition space for the next 25 years.
Well, it's interesting, sitting from where I am and sort of watching this all in real time. What's interesting is that there's some things that are just natural to you. And I think analyzing was one of those things, because that's where you started your career, was being an analyst, right? So you essentially acquired a skill, which was sales, right? That was the acquired skill. You leveraged that. Now you're in a place where you're doing something that comes very naturally to you that you love, which is analyzing businesses, and then you're leveraging this skill set you built, which is selling, dealing with business owners, etc.
Yep, I know where you're going with this. So, I think for these younger sales reps today, the one thing I would take from this is, what are you selling today? And taking a moment to understand that, let's say you're selling a product today that's worth $2,000 or $3,000, right? And let's say it's a medical device for something else. And that's what I did for years, right? And then I started just levering up what I'm selling. Today, I'm selling to owners to sell me their business, right? I'm selling myself to say, convincing them to sell me their company. I'm convincing high quality CEOs to come work for these companies today. So before I was training sales reps, right? Now I'm training CEOs to come work for my companies and selling them on the vision, the dream of what I'm trying to build today. And all I've done is just lever up the skill set. And who knows, in 5-10 years, I'm probably going to be selling something much greater than I am today. So it's always continuously compounding what you're doing today and doing something greater and moving your baseline a lot further, therefore, after.
Fantastic. Yeah, and just to kind of compare it for our audience, what you're doing is no different than a lot of these larger strategics are doing, like Medtronic, Baxter, et cetera. And I'll use Baxter as an example, which is their CEO came out and said, like, hey, we're not doing any more transformational acquisitions of like multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. We're doing $300 to $500 million acquisitions of things that are tuck-in businesses to our core business. So you're doing the same thing, except in a different way, and mainly focusing on one thesis, which is not getting great businesses, it's getting great paving businesses.
Yep. I mean, I think fundamentally what I wanted to build is something that anyone can understand. These roads will outlast us. They're AI resistant. There's barriers to entry to enter this space. These owners have, great businesses that they've built, and they have no proper succession plan, and there's not many people who can go buy these businesses. So we've created a really good team around this. And then what I did is I built the basketball team. And I think everyone should go do this, is find people around you and understand their position and find their zone of genius. I knew what my zone of genius is I can go grow businesses, find portfolio companies, and hire CEOs. But I need to go find the person who can go underwrite these businesses better than me. I need to go find the paving expert and find an advisor. I found that. Find someone to go raise money on our behalf. I found that. Continue finding people to go offset the skill sets so you're not wearing multiple hats and building a business, and go find great people around you, focus on a great opportunity, and then you don't need to worry about the outcome, because the outcome will come because you combine all those things together.
Amazing. And, first of all, I want to thank you for coming on the show. Definitely want to have you on in like 6 to 9 months, kind of report back what's new.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, you're very active online at Sam Mahmood. But for anybody who, let's say, is an accredited investor, or they just want to learn more about this, do you guys have a website set up? Where can they go and learn more?
Yeah, it's thepave.co. And feel free to shoot me a message as well. On LinkedIn, I'm Sam Mahmood. You can check out our website, and if you're interested in learning more about the Pave and what we're doing, just give me a shout.
Perfect. Sam, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
That was a lot of fun, man.
It was a lot of fun. Awesome, man.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you want to do me a big favor and join so many other people who have helped grow this podcast, take a second and look below. If you're on Apple, give us 5 stars and write a short review. If you're on Spotify, just give us 5 stars. And if you're on YouTube, hit the like button. And most importantly, if you can, subscribe. We release so many different episodes that you may miss. Be sure to subscribe and turn your notifications on. You get extra points with me if you subscribe across all 3 channels. Thank you so much. And if you felt like this episode helped you, send this to somebody who'd really enjoy and appreciate it. Share and spread the love. We'll see you all next time.